I was arranging fresh daisies in the crystal vase my late husband Harold had given me for our 40th anniversary, when I heard the cars pulling into my driveway. Multiple cars, engines shutting off in quick succession, followed by hushed voices, and the sound of car doors slamming. It was barely past noon on a Tuesday, and I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the lace curtains of my front window, I watched my daughter Patricia climb out of her silver SUV, followed by my son Michael from his black sedan. Behind them, my youngest daughter Rebecca emerged from a white rental car I didn't recognize. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. They were all here. All three of my children gathered at my house without warning, without invitation, carrying what looked like brochures and manila folders. Patricia was wearing her serious navy blazer, the one she wore to business meetings and important occasions. Michael had his lawyer face on, that stern expression he'd perfected during his 23 years in corporate law. Rebecca looked nervous, fidgeting with her purse strap and glancing back at the rental car as if she might bolt back to the airport. My hands stilled on the flower stems. In 68 years of living, I'd learned to trust my instincts, and right now every instinct I had was screaming that something was terribly wrong. The last time all three of my children had shown up unannounced was when Harold had his first heart attack. But Harold had been gone for 3 years now, and I was perfectly fine, healthy, independent, and living exactly the way I chose to live. I watched them huddle near Patricia's car, whispering urgently while Patricia shuffled through her folders. Michael kept checking his watch, and Rebecca was smoothing down her skirt like she always did when she was about to deliver bad news. They looked like a delegation, like people who had come to my home with a mission. The doorbell rang, followed immediately by Patricia's voice calling out, "Mom, it's us. We have a surprise for you." A surprise. I set down the vase and walked slowly toward the front door. My slippers silent on the hardwood floors. Harold and I had refinished together 15 years ago. Through the peephole, I could see all three of them arranged on my front porch, like they were posing for a family photo, forced smiles plastered on their faces, and those manila folders clutched tight in their hands. I opened the door to their chorus of surprise, but there was something hollow about it, something rehearsed. Patricia stepped forward first, as always taking charge, and pulled me into a hug that felt more like a restraint than an embrace. "We have the most wonderful news," she said, her voice pitched too high, too bright. "We've found the perfect place for you. My name is Cora Henderson, and for the past 3 years since my husband Harold passed away, I thought I had been building a peaceful, independent life in the home we'd shared for 42 years. I taught piano lessons to neighborhood children twice a week, tended to my garden that had won the County Beautification Award 3 years running, and volunteered at the local literacy center every Thursday morning. My children visited regularly, called frequently, and seemed supportive of my decision to stay in the family home rather than downsize. I was wrong about so many things. I grew up in small-town Wisconsin, the middle child of 3 daughters born to parents who ran the local hardware store. My father taught me that independence wasn't just a luxury, it was a necessity, especially for women. My mother showed me that a home could be both a sanctuary and a source of strength. I carried those lessons with me when I married Harold at 23, fresh out of college with a degree in education and dreams of teaching music to children. Harold was a good man, steady, and kind, with calloused hands from his work as a carpenter and a laugh that could fill a room. We built our life together slowly, deliberately, like Harold built the custom cabinets and bookshelves that still lined our walls. We saved for years to buy the house on Maple Street, a modest 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch and enough land for the garden I'd always wanted. Our children came in the years that followed, Patricia first, serious and driven even as a toddler, always organizing her toys and bossing around the neighborhood kids. Michael arrived 2 years later, quieter than his sister but equally determined, the kind of child who would spend hours building elaborate structures with his blocks. Rebecca came last, 6 years younger than Michael, our surprise baby who brought laughter and chaos in equal measure. I loved being their mother, loved the symphony of a house full of children, the way their voices carried up the stairs, the constant hum of activity that made our home feel alive. I taught piano lessons from the converted sunroom off the kitchen, and our house became a gathering place for neighborhood family. Harold would come home from work to find the living room full of children practicing for recitals, parents chatting over coffee in the kitchen, and me in the middle of it all, conducting the beautiful chaos of a life well lived. The children grew up, as children do. Patricia became a successful marketing executive in Chicago, married to a surgeon named David, who spoke mostly in medical terminology and treated family gatherings like networking events. Michael followed his father's practical streak into law, specializing in estate planning and corporate contracts, married to a woman named Jennifer, who seemed to view our family through the lens of efficiency and improvement. Rebecca, our free spirit, became a social worker in Denver, unmarried by choice and fiercely protective of her independence. They were good children, successful in their own ways, but I began to notice changes in how they spoke to me as the years passed. Little comments about my driving, suggestions that the house was too big for just Harold and me, gentle nudges toward what they called more suitable living arrangements. I dismissed it as natural concern, the way children worry about their aging parent. When Harold had his first heart attack at 64, the children rallied around us with military precision. Patricia created spreadsheets of doctors and medications. Michael researched the best cardiac specialists in the state. Rebecca took a week off work to stay with us and help with Harold's recovery. Their love and support carried us through that frightening time, and I was grateful for their involvement. Harold recovered well from that first episode, though he had to retire earlier than we'd planned. Those last years before his second, fatal heart attack were some of our happiest. He spent his days puttering in the garden, teaching neighborhood boys how to use power tools, and helping me with the heavier aspects of maintaining our home. We traveled a little, visited old friends, and settled into the rhythm of a couple who had weathered life's storms and emerged stronger. When Harold died suddenly on a Thursday morning in April, 3 years ago, I thought my world had ended. We'd been married for 43 years, and I couldn't imagine life without his steady presence, his terrible jokes, his way of humming off-key while he worked in the garage. The grief felt like drowning, like learning to breathe underwater while the world continued spinning around me. But I didn't drown. Slowly, carefully, I learned to live as a widow. I kept teaching piano lessons because the children's laughter helped fill the silence. I maintained Harold's garden because it felt like keeping a piece of him alive. I stayed in our house because every room held memories I wasn't ready to pack away. My children were wonderfully supportive during those first months of grief. They called daily, visited frequently, and helped me navigate the practical aspects of widowhood. Patricia handled the insurance paperwork with her usual efficiency. Michael guided me through the legal requirements of settling Harold's estate. Rebecca simply sat with me during the hardest days, holding my hand while I cried and listening to my stories about their father. I thought we had settled into a new normal, a rhythm that honored both my need for independence and their desire to stay connected. I hosted Sunday dinners when they could make it, called them every Wednesday evening to catch up, and made sure they knew I was managing well on my own. Looking back now, I realize that my perception of managing well and their perception of my capabilities had begun to diverge in ways I never suspected. What I saw as healthy independence, they apparently viewed as stubborn isolation. What I considered careful self-sufficiency, they interpreted as dangerous denial of my limitations. The first subtle shift came about 18 months after Harold's death. Patricia began asking more pointed questions during our weekly phone calls. How was I sleeping? Was I remembering to take my vitamins? Had I been getting out of the house enough? The questions felt caring at first, the natural concern of a daughter for her widowed mother. But then came the suggestions. Had I considered joining a senior center? There were wonderful communities designed specifically for people my age. Wouldn't it be nice to be around peers, to have activities planned, to not have to worry about home maintenance? The suggestions were gentle, wrapped in concern for my well-being and happiness. Michael's approach was more practical. During his visits, he would walk through the house making mental notes, commenting on the size of the rooms, the age of the appliances, the ongoing costs of utilities and maintenance. He began bringing real estate listings, not aggressively. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Just leaving them on the kitchen counter in case you ever want to look at options. The listings were always for condominiums or retirement communities, places where everything would be taken care of for you. Rebecca was the most direct. During one of her visits last Christmas, she sat me down at the kitchen table and spoke with the gentle firmness she used in her social work practice. She was worried about me, she said. I seemed lonely, isolated. The house was too big, too much responsibility. There were so many wonderful options available now for seniors, places where I could have independence, but also community, security, peace of mind. I listened to all of them with the patience I'd learned from 43 years of marriage and 30+ years of motherhood. I appreciated their concern. I told them I understood their worries, but I was happy in my home, capable of caring for myself, and not ready to make any major changes. I thought that was the end of it. I should have paid more attention to the way they exchanged glances when they thought I wasn't looking. I should have noticed how their visits became more frequent, but also more purposeful, as if they were conducting evaluations rather than spending time with their mother. I should have realized that their gentle suggestions were actually a coordinated campaign, a slow and steady pressure designed to wear down my resistance. Instead, I continued living my life the way I had chosen to live it. I woke each morning in the bedroom I had shared with Harold, made coffee in the kitchen where we'd raised our children, and tended to the garden where we'd planned to grow old together. I taught piano to children who reminded me why music mattered, volunteered with adults who were learning to read, because education had always been my passion, and maintained the home that represented everything Harold and I had built together. I thought I was living independently and successfully. I thought my children respected my choices even if they didn't always agree with them. I thought we had found a balance between their concern and my autonomy. I was completely unprepared for what they had planned for this Tuesday afternoon, armed with their manila folders and their forced smiles and their surprise that wasn't a surprise at all, but an ambush designed to change the course of my life without my consent. Standing in my doorway looking at their expectant faces, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't a social visit. This wasn't even a family intervention. This was something else entirely, something that made my instincts scream warnings I should have heeded months ago. Patricia was still talking, her voice bright and cheerful, explaining how they'd spent weeks researching the perfect place for me, how excited they were to show me the brochures, how this was going to solve all my problems. Michael stood behind her nodding solemnly, his lawyer's training evident in the way he watched my face for reactions. Rebecca hung back slightly, her social worker's intuition clearly telling her this approach might not be received as well as they hoped. I stepped back from the doorway not to invite them in, but to give myself space to think. They interpreted it as an invitation and filed into my front hallway. Patricia immediately spreading her brochures across my dining room table like she was setting up for a business presentation. "Mom, you're going to love this place," she said, her voice carrying the forced enthusiasm of someone trying to sell something she knows the buyer doesn't want. "It's called Sunset Manor, and it's absolutely beautiful. They have activities, meals are included, there's a lovely garden, and best of all, you won't have to worry about anything ever again." She opened the first brochure to reveal glossy photos of smiling elderly people playing cards, doing crafts, eating meals in a communal dining room. Everything looked sanitized and cheerful, and completely foreign to the life I had built for myself. Michael stepped forward with his own folder. "I've reviewed all the financial aspects," he said in his professional voice. "The house has appreciated significantly since you and Dad bought it. If we sell now, there will be more than enough to cover the costs of the facility, with a substantial amount left over for your future needs." Rebecca finally spoke up, her voice gentler than her siblings but no less determined. "Mom, we're worried about you. This house is so isolated, and you're here all alone. What if something happens? What if you fall, or have a medical emergency? At Sunset Manor, there would always be someone there to help." I stood in my own dining room, surrounded by my children and their plans for my future, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't a discussion, this wasn't even a suggestion. They had already decided what was best for me, had researched options, run financial calculations, and prepared presentations. The only thing they hadn't done was ask what I wanted. When would this transition happen? I asked quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. Patricia beamed, clearly interpreting my question as acceptance. Well, we've already put down a deposit to hold a spot for you. The room will be available at the beginning of next month, so we'd need to start the moving process fairly quickly. You put down a deposit, I repeated slowly, without asking me. Michael cleared his throat. Mom, we know this is a big change, but we've done all the research. This is really the best option for everyone. Best for everyone, I echoed, including me. Especially for you, Rebecca said earnestly. Mom, you'll be so much happier that you'll have people to talk to, activities to keep you busy, no more worrying about maintaining this big house. I looked around my dining room, at the table where we'd eaten thousands of family meals, at the china cabinet Harold had built by hand, at the walls covered with photos of graduations, and weddings, and grandchildren's birthday party. I thought about my piano students, who depended on their lessons. I thought about my garden, which was just coming into its spring glory. I thought about my volunteers at the literacy center, who were counting on me to be there Thursday morning. And I thought about the fact that my children had made plans for my life without including me in the decision-making process. I need some time to think about this, I said finally. Patricia's smile faltered slightly. Mom, there really isn't much time. We need to give them an answer by Friday, and there's so much to organize. We thought we could start going through your things this week, decide what you'll want to take with you. Going through my things, I repeated. Well, yes, Michael said matter of fact. Obviously you can't take everything. The rooms at Sunset Manor are much smaller than this house. We'll need to prioritize the essentials and decide what to do with the rest. I felt something cold and hard forming in my chest, like ice crystallizing around my heart. They weren't just planning to move me out of my home, they were planning to dismantle my life, to sort through my possessions, like estate sale organizers, to decide what parts of my history were worth preserving. Who gave you the authority to make these decisions? I asked, my voice still quiet, but carrying an edge that made Rebecca take a step back. Mom, Patricia said, her tone becoming slightly impatient. We're your children. We're trying to help you. We can see that you're struggling here, even if you won't admit it. Struggling with what, exactly? With everything, Michael said bluntly. The house is too much for you to handle. You're isolated from other people your age. You're not taking proper care of yourself. Based on what evidence? The three of them exchanged glances, and I realized they had prepared for this question too. Mom, Rebecca said gently, we've noticed things. You seem tired when we call. You've mentioned forgetting appointments. Last month when I visited, there were dishes in the sink, and your garden was a little overgrown. I stared at her. I had the flu last month. I told you that when you call, and that's exactly what we're worried about. Patricia jumped in. What if you get sick again and there's no one here to help? What if it's something more serious next time? I realized in that moment that they had been building a case against me, collecting evidence of my supposed decline, interpreting every normal human moment of fatigue, or forgetfulness, or illness, as proof that I was no longer capable of living independently. They had already decided I was failing, and now they were presenting their solution, as if it were a rescue rather than a betrayal. I want you all to leave, I said quietly. Mom, Patricia started. I want you to take your brochures and your financial plans, and your deposit, and I want you to leave my house. We're not trying to upset you, Michael said in his lawyer voice. We're trying to help, by making major decisions about my life, without consulting, by putting down deposits, and making plans, and then presenting them to me as a fait accompli. That's not help, Michael, that's control. Rebecca stepped forward, her social worker training evident in her approach. Mom, I know this feels overwhelming. Change is always difficult, but we really have done our research, and this is going to be so much better for you. Better according to whom? According to anyone with common sense, Patricia snapped, her patience finally fraying. Mom, you're 68 years old. You're living alone in a house that's too big for you, and you're being stubborn about accepting help. I am 68 years old, I agreed. I am not senile, incapacitated, or incompetent. I am living in the home I chose, the way I choose to live, and I don't recall asking for your help in changing that. You shouldn't have to ask, Michael said. We're your family, yes, you are, and as my family, you should respect my choices, not override them. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken accusations and hurt feelings. Patricia gathered up her brochures with sharp, angry movements. Michael's jaw was set in the stubborn line I remembered from his childhood. Rebecca looked like she might cry. We'll give you some time to think about it, Patricia said, finally, her voice tight with suppressed frustration. But Mom, this is happening whether you like it or not. We've already committed to the deposit, and we're not going to stand by and watch you struggle unnecessarily. I watched them file out of my house, their forced smiles replaced by grim determination and disappointment. Patricia paused at the door to deliver one final shot. We love you, Mom, even if you can't see that right now. I stood in my dining room for a long time after they left, staring at the indentations their brochures had left on my polished table. Outside, their cars started up and pulled out of my driveway, leaving me alone with the terrible understanding that my children had just declared war on my independence. But what they didn't know, what they had failed to consider in all their careful planning and research, was that I hadn't spent 68 years on this earth without learning how to fight back. They thought they were dealing with a confused, struggling elderly woman who needed their guidance and protection. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. That night I sat in Harold's old chair by the window, watching the street lamps flicker on one by one down Maple Street. The house felt different somehow, as if my children's visit had shifted something fundamental in its foundation. I could still smell Patricia's perfume lingering in the dining room, still see the slight impressions their folders had left on my table's surface. I didn't sleep well. Every creak of the old house settling seemed amplified, every shadow looked suspicious. Not because I was afraid of being alone, but because I was beginning to understand that my solitude might not last much longer. My children had drawn their battle lines, and I was finally seeing the campaign they'd been waging against my independence for months without my realizing it. The next morning brought the first subtle escalation. Patricia called at 7:30, earlier than her usual Wednesday check-in. Mom, I hope you've had time to think about our conversation yesterday, she said, her voice carefully modulated to sound reasonable and concerned. I know it was a lot to process, but I really think once you see the facility in person, you'll understand why we're so excited about this opportunity. I told you I needed time to think, Patricia. Of course, and we respect that, but I've scheduled a tour for us this Saturday at 2 o'clock. I thought it would be helpful for you to see the amenities, meet some of the residents, get a feel for the community. I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. You scheduled a tour without asking if I wanted one. Well, yes, because I knew if I asked you'd probably say no, and then you'd be making a decision without all the information. This way, you can see everything before you decide. The logic was so twisted it took me a moment to formulate a response. Patricia, the fact that you knew I would say no should have told you something about whether I want this tour. Mom, please don't be difficult about this. Michael and Rebecca are flying back in just for the weekend. We're all making an effort here. An effort to do what, exactly? To override my clearly stated wishes. There was a pause, and when Patricia spoke again her voice had taken on that edge of impatience I'd been hearing more frequent. Mom, we're trying to help you make the best decision for your future. Sometimes that means pushing a little when someone is being stubborn. Stubborn? Is that what you call it when I disagree with your plans for my life? I call it stubborn when you refuse to even consider options that would clearly be better for you. I hung up the phone. It rang again immediately. I let it go to the answering machine. Mom, I know you're there. Please don't hang up on me. We're going to this tour on Saturday, and that's fine. I'll pick you up at 1:30. I deleted the message and unplugged the phone. The silence that followed felt both peaceful and ominous. I knew Patricia well enough to know that hanging up on her would be interpreted as further evidence of my declining mental state, rather than a reasonable response to her increasingly controlling behavior. In her mind, a rational mother would gratefully accept her children's guidance. My resistance only proved I needed more help than they'd initially thought. I spent the morning in my garden, pulling weeds, and deadheading the early roses. The physical work helped me think, and by noon I had reached some uncomfortable conclusion. My children weren't going to accept my refusal gracefully. They had already invested money in this plan, had coordinated their schedules, had convinced themselves they were rescuing me from a situation I didn't even realize was dire. More troubling, they seemed to believe they had the right to make these decisions for me regardless of my preferences. Patricia's comment about the tour being final suggested they had moved beyond trying to persuade me, and were now simply implementing their plan with or without my cooperation. Around 2 o'clock, while I was transplanting some volunteer tomato seedlings that had sprouted along my back fence, I heard a car in the driveway again. This time it was Michael, alone, carrying what looked like legal documents. He found me in the backyard, dirt under my fingernails and sweat beading on my forehead, despite the mild spring afternoon. "Mom, we need to talk," I continued, working with my transplants, not looking up. "About what?" "About your living situation, about Dad's estate, about some things I've discovered that I think you should know about." That made me pause. Harold's estate had been settled years ago, or so I thought. "What kind of things?" Michael sat down heavily, on the wooden bench Harold had built beneath our old oak tree. "I've been reviewing Dad's will and the property records, and I think there might be some issues with the house that you're not aware of." I set down my trowel and looked at him directly. "What kind of issues?" "Well, the mortgage wasn't completely paid off when Dad died. There's still a small balance, and with the property taxes and maintenance costs, you're spending more each month than you're bringing in with your pension and Social Security." I stared at him. "Michael, the house has been paid off for 8 years. Your father and I made the final payment in 2. We had a celebration dinner, remember? You were there." "I think you might be confused about that, Mom. I have the documents right here." He opened his folder and pulled out what appeared to be an official-looking mortgage statement, showing a balance of nearly $30,000. My name was on the document, along with Harold's, but I had never seen this paperwork before. "This is impossible," I said flatly. "We never took out a second mortgage. We never borrowed against the house after it was paid off." "Mom, you might not remember, sometimes when people are grieving, they make financial decisions that don't seem rational later." I felt something cold creeping up my spine. "Are you suggesting I took out a mortgage on my own house and then forgot about it?" "I'm suggesting that you were dealing with a lot after Dad died, and you might have signed some papers without fully understanding what they were." I looked at the document more carefully. The signature that was supposed to be mine looked close, but something about it felt wrong. The date on the mortgage was 6 months after Harold's death, during the time when I was admittedly struggling with grief and paperwork, and the overwhelming details of becoming a widow. "I want to see the original documents," I said. "I want to see what I supposedly signed." "Mom, that's not really necessary. The important thing is figuring out how to handle the situation now. And honestly, this just reinforces what Patricia and Rebecca and I have been saying. The house is becoming a financial burden you can't afford." "Convenient," I said quietly. "What?" "I said it's convenient. I tell you I don't want to move to a nursing home, and suddenly you discover financial problems that make staying in my house impossible." Michael's expression shifted slightly, just enough to confirm my suspicion. "Mom, this isn't about what you want or don't want. This is about reality. You can't afford to keep this house, and you can't physically maintain it." "According to whom?" "According to your bank statements, your tax records, and basic math." I stood up, brushing dirt off my gardening gloves. "I want to see my bank statements. All of them. I want to see my tax records. I want to see the original mortgage documents. And I want to see them today." "Mom, I don't think you understand how complicated this is." "Michael," my voice carried the tone I'd used when he was 12, and trying to convince me he hadn't broken the neighbor's window with his baseball. "Bring me my financial records. Now." He sighed heavily, the way he used to when he was caught in a lie. "I don't have them all with me. They're at my office. In the files." "Then we'll go to your office." "That's not really practical." "Then you'll bring them here." Tonight, we stared at each other across the garden, and I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before when he looked at me. Not just impatience or frustration, but a kind of cold calculation. He was weighing his options, deciding how much truth he could afford to tell me. Mom, the bottom line is that you need to be realistic about your situation. The house costs more than you can afford. You're isolated here, and you're not taking proper care of yourself. Moving to Sunset Manor solves all of those problems. And if I refuse, then we'll have to explore other options. What other options? Michael's jaw tightened. There are legal processes available when elderly parents aren't capable of making sound decisions about their own welfare. The words hit me like a physical blow. Legal process, guardianship proceedings, conservatorship, ways to ensure that someone who's no longer mentally competent gets the care they need. I felt the world tilt slightly around me. Are you threatening to have me declared incompetent? I'm explaining the reality of the situation. If you can't or won't make reasonable decisions about your living situation, then someone else will have to make them for you. We stood in silence for a long moment, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the garden. Harold and I had built together. A cardinal landed on the bird feeder near the back fence, bright red against the green background, completely oblivious to the fact that my life was being dismantled around me. Get off my property, I said quietly. Mom, get off my property and don't come back unless you're invited. Michael gathered his papers with deliberate slowness, clearly trying to decide whether to push the confrontation further. Finally, he stood and walked toward the house. We're trying to help you, he said over his shoulder. I'm sorry you can't see that. I watched him disappear around the corner of the house, heard his car start and pull out of the driveway. Then I sat down on Harold's bench and tried to process what had just happened. My son had just threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent if I refused to go along with their plan to move me into a nursing home. He had produced financial documents that I was certain were fraudulent, claiming I owed money on a house that had been paid off for years, and he had done it all while claiming to act in my best interests. I looked around my garden, at the roses Harold had planted for our anniversary, at the vegetable beds where I grew enough tomatoes and peppers to share with half the neighborhood, at the bird feeders that attracted families of cardinals and blue jays and finches, who had become part of my daily routine. This was my home, my sanctuary, my life's work, and my children were planning to take it all away from me. But the worst part wasn't their plan. The worst part was the dawning realization that they might actually be able to do it. That evening, after Michael's visit, I did something I hadn't done since Harold died. I called my friend Dorothy Kellerman, a woman I'd known since my children were small, who had retired 5 years ago from her job as a paralegal at a family law firm. Dorothy, I need some legal advice, and I need you to keep this conversation confidential. Of course, honey. What's going on? I told her everything. The surprise visit, the nursing home, brochures, the mysterious mortgage documents, Michael's threats about guardianship proceedings. Dorothy listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of sympathy or outrage. When I finished, there was a long pause. Cora, she said finally, you need to document everything, every conversation, every visit, every document they show you, and you need to get yourself a lawyer. Immediately. Do you think they can actually do what Michael threatened? Can they really have me declared incompetent? It's possible, but it's not easy. They'd have to prove to a court that you're mentally incapable of making your own decisions. But the fact that they're even threatening it tells me they're serious about this plan. What about the mortgage documents? Could they be fake? Absolutely. And if they are, that's fraud. But Cora, you need to be very careful here. If your children are willing to forge financial documents and threaten guardianship proceedings, they're playing for keeps. What should I do? First, go to the bank tomorrow and get copies of all your financial records going back at least 5 years. Make sure you know exactly what your financial situation really is. Second, call a lawyer who specializes in elder law. Third, start writing down everything that's happened, with dates and times and exact quotes as much as you can remember. And fourth, honey, Prepare yourself for the possibility that this is going to get much worse before it gets better. I hung up the phone with Dorothy's words echoing in my mind. Much worse before it gets better. I had raised 3 children, buried a husband, and lived through 68 years of life's ups and downs. I thought I understood what worse looked like. I was about to learn how naive that assumption was. The next morning, Thursday, I woke early and drove to the First National Bank, where Harold and I had done our banking for over 40 years. I asked to speak with someone about my account history and was directed to a young woman named Jessica, who couldn't have been much older than my granddaughter. I need copies of all my financial records, I told her. Bank statements, loan documents, everything you have on file for the past 5 years. Jessica looked at me with the kind of patient smile people reserve for elderly customers who don't understand how banking works. Miss Henderson, I can certainly help you with recent statements, but for older records, we might need to order them from our archive department. That could take several days. I have time, and there would be fees associated with retrieving older documents. How much? It depends on how many documents you need, but it could be several $100s. I pulled out my checkbook. I'll pay whatever it costs. Jessica's expression shifted slightly, clearly realizing I was more serious than she'd initially assumed. Can I ask why you need these particular records? Because someone is claiming I have financial obligations that I don't believe exist, and I want to verify my actual situation. She pulled up my account on her computer and began scrolling through the records. After a few minutes, she frowned. Mrs. Henderson, I'm seeing some activity on your account that seems unusual. My stomach dropped. What kind of activity? Well, there are several large withdrawals over the past 18 months, and there's a monthly automatic payment going to something called Maple Street Holdings. Does that sound familiar? I had never heard of Maple Street Holdings in my life. How much are the monthly payments? $450, automatically debited on the 15th of each month. I felt dizzy. For how long? Let me see. It looks like it started about 14 months ago. 14 months ago was around the time Patricia had offered to help me organize my finances, after I'd mentioned feeling overwhelmed by the paperwork involved in managing Harold's pension and my Social Security. She had spent a weekend going through my records, setting up automatic payments for my utilities and other bills, and creating what she called a simplified system for managing my money. I want to see every transaction, I said. Jessica printed out 18 months' worth of bank statements, while I sat in the lobby trying not to panic. When she handed me the thick stack of papers, I could see immediately that something was very wrong. The large withdrawals she'd mentioned were all made by check, in amounts ranging from $2,000 to $5,000. The checks were made out to various companies I'd never heard of: Home Maintenance Solutions, Senior Care Consulting, Medical Equipment Specialist. All of the checks were signed with my name, but looking at them closely, I could see that the signatures were slightly different from my usual handwriting. More troubling, the monthly payments to Maple Street Holdings had been ongoing for over a year, and I had never authorized. According to the bank's records, the automatic payment had been set up with a signed authorization form, but I had no memory of signing any such form. Jessica, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, I need to speak with your manager. Someone has been forging checks on my account. What followed was an hour of phone calls, paperwork, and increasingly grave expressions from bank employees. They froze my account immediately and initiated a fraud investigation. They explained that it could take weeks to determine the extent of the unauthorized activity, and that I would need to file a police report. By the time I left the bank, I understood that someone had been systematically stealing from me for over a year. Someone who had access to my account information, who knew my signature well enough to forge it convincingly, and who had used my own daughter's offer to help with my finances as cover for their theft. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot, staring at the evidence of my own financial victimization, and felt something cold and hard crystallizing in my chest. This wasn't just about moving me to a nursing home. This was about creating a financial crisis that would make my resistance to their plans impossible. My children hadn't just threatened to take away my independence. They had been systematically stealing from me to make it happen. I drove home slowly, my mind racing through the implications of what I'd discovered. Patricia had helped me set up my automatic payments. Michael had access to my financial information as the executor of Harold's estate. Rebecca, with her social work background, would know exactly how to document evidence of my supposed incompetence. They had been planning this for months, maybe years. Every visit, every helpful gesture, every expression of concern had been part of a coordinated effort to undermine my independence and position themselves as my saviors. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had assumed I was a confused, grieving elderly woman who wouldn't fight back. They had underestimated both my intelligence and my determination to protect what Harold and I had built together. I parked in my driveway and sat for a moment, looking at my house with new eyes. This wasn't just my home anymore. It was the prize in a war I hadn't realized was being fought. My children wanted it, needed it, gone to make their plan work, and they were willing to commit fraud and theft to get it. Well, I thought, getting out of the car and walking up the front steps, they were about to discover that their mother had learned a few things about fighting during her 68 years on this earth. And unlike them, I planned to fight fair, which would make my victory even more devastating. The afternoon brought another unwelcome surprise. Rebecca called, her voice carefully modulated to sound casual and caring. "Hi, Mom. Michael told me about your conversation yesterday. I'm worried about you. Are you worried about me, or worried about your plan?" "Mom, there's no plan. We're just trying to help." "But Michael said you seemed confused about some financial matters, and that concerns me." "I'm not confused about anything, Rebecca. I'm very clear about what's been happening." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I went to the bank today and discovered that someone has been forging checks on my account and stealing my money for over a year." There was a pause. "Mom, that's very concerning. Are you sure you're remembering things correct?" "I'm holding the bank statements in my hand right now, Rebecca. 18 months worth of unauthorized transactions. Sometimes elderly people can become confused about their finances," she said gently, slipping into her professional social worker voice. "It's very common, especially after a significant loss like Dad's death. Maybe we should schedule an appointment with your doctor, just to make sure everything's okay." I felt something snap inside me. "Rebecca, stop talking to me like I'm one of your clients. I am your mother. I am not suffering from dementia, and I am not confused about someone stealing my money." "Mom, I didn't say you had dementia, but you have to admit, accusing someone of forging checks is a pretty serious allegation. Are you sure you didn't authorize those transactions and just forgot about them? Are you suggesting I have memory problems?" "I'm suggesting that grief can affect people in ways they don't always recognize." I realized she was baiting me, trying to get me to say something angry or irrational that she could later use as evidence of my declining mental state. Every word of this conversation was probably being recorded or at least carefully noted for future reference. "Rebecca, I need to go. I have an appointment." "An appointment with whom?" "With my lawyer." That gave her pause. "You hired a lawyer?" "Mom, why would you need a lawyer?" "To discuss my legal options when family members commit fraud against elderly relatives." "Mom, please don't do anything rash. Let's all sit down and talk about this calmly." The time for calm discussion ended when you and your siblings decided to make plans for my life without including me in the decision-making process. "We're trying to help." "No, Rebecca, you're trying to control. There's a difference." I hung up the phone and immediately called Dorothy Kellerman. "Dorothy, do you know any good elder law attorneys?" "Yes, honey, a woman named Margaret Chen. She's tough as nails and specializes in cases where families are trying to take advantage of older relatives." "But Cora, are you sure you want to go down this road? Once you involve lawyers, there's no going back." "Dorothy, they've been stealing my money and threatening to have me declared incompetent. The road to war was chosen by them, not me." "Then Margaret Chen is exactly who you need. I'll call her tonight and see if she can see you tomorrow." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with all the bank statements spread out in front of me, documenting every suspicious transaction. The pattern was clear and deliberate, small amounts at first, then larger ones as they grew bolder, all timed to coincide with periods when I was particularly grieving or distracted. The monthly payments to Maple Street Holdings were the most damning evidence. $450 every month for 14 months, totaling over $6,000 for services I had never requested from a company I had never heard of. I called the phone number associated with Maple Street Holdings, listed on the bank record. It went straight to voicemail with a generic message asking me to leave my name and number. I didn't. Instead, I did some research online. There was no website for Maple Street Holdings, no business listing, no record of the company anywhere except for a basic registration with the state that showed it had been incorporated 2 years ago with Patricia Greer listed as the registered agent. My daughter had created a fake company and used it to steal money from my bank account for over a year. I sat back in my chair staring at the computer screen and felt the last of my maternal illusions crumble away. This wasn't about concern for my welfare or desire to help me live more safely. This was about money, pure and simple. They wanted my house, my assets, and my independence eliminated so they could control my life and my resources. But what they didn't know was that Harold and I had been more careful about our financial planning than they realized. What they didn't know was that I had resources they had never discovered, accounts they had never seen, and legal protections they had never considered. What they definitely didn't know was that their mother had spent 43 years married to a man who had taught her that sometimes the best defense is a devastating offense. I picked up the phone and called Margaret Chen's office, leaving a message requesting an emergency consultation. Then I called Dorothy back. Dorothy, I need one more favor. I need you to help me do some research on my children's financial situations. Cora, what are you planning? I'm planning to find out exactly why they need my money badly enough to steal it, and then I'm going to make sure they understand that their mother is not the helpless victim they thought they were dealing with. Honey, be careful. When families go to war over money, things can get very ugly very quickly. Dorothy, I said, looking around my kitchen, at the home I had built with Harold, at the life I had created for myself. It's already ugly. The only question now is who's going to win. The next morning brought a development I hadn't expected. I woke to find a car I didn't recognize parked across the street from my house, with a man inside who seemed to be watching my front door. When I peeked through the curtains, he looked away quickly, but he didn't leave. I called Dorothy. There's someone watching my house. Are you positive? He's been there for at least an hour. Have you called the police? Not yet, but Dorothy, I'm scared. What if my children have hired someone to, I don't know, to make me seem incompetent, or to report on my behavior? It's possible. In guardianship cases, families sometimes hire private investigators to document evidence of declining mental capacity. The thought chilled me. What should I do? Document everything, take pictures if you can, and definitely call the police if you feel threatened. I spent the day moving carefully through my house, staying away from windows, feeling like a prisoner in my own home. The car stayed until mid-afternoon, then left without the driver ever getting out or approaching my house. Around 5 o'clock, Patricia called. Mom, I heard you went to the bank yesterday and caused quite a scene. I didn't cause a scene. I discovered that someone has been stealing from me. Mom, you're being paranoid. No one is stealing from you. Patricia, I have documentation, forged checks, unauthorized payments, fake companies. This is all going to come out. Mom, you're clearly confused and upset. This is exactly what we've been worried about. You're becoming suspicious of the people who love you most. Am I, or am I finally seeing clearly what's been happening right under my nose? I think you need to see a doctor. In fact, I've made an appointment for you with Dr. Morrison for tomorrow morning. Dr. Morrison was my longtime physician, a kind man who had treated Harold and me for years, but the idea that Patricia had made medical appointments for me without my consent sent another chill down my spine. I didn't ask you to make any appointments for me. Mom, as your daughter, I have the right to be concerned about your health. You don't have the right to make medical decisions for me. Not yet, she said, and the words carried a clear threat. But if you continue to show signs of mental decline, that could change. I hung up the phone with shaking hands. They were accelerating their timeline, increasing the pressure, making it clear that my resistance was only strengthening their resolve to take control of my life. But as I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by evidence of their theft and manipulation, I felt something unexpected rising in my chest. Not fear, Not despair, but anger, clean, pure, righteous anger at the betrayal of the people I had loved and trusted most in the world. My children thought they were dealing with a weak, confused old woman who would eventually capitulate to their demands. They were about to discover that they had seriously miscalculated both my strength and my willingness to fight for what was mine. The war they had started was about to take a very different direction than they expected. Saturday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth and the kind of bright sunshine that made everything look deceptively cheerful. I had spent Friday evening preparing for what I knew would be a confrontation, gathering my documentation, organizing my thoughts, and steeling myself for the battle ahead. At exactly 1:30, Patricia's silver SUV pulled into my driveway. She sat there for several minutes, engine running, clearly expecting me to emerge ready for our nursing home tour. When I didn't appear, she honked twice, then got out and marched to my front door. "Mom, we need to leave now or we'll be late for the appointment." I opened the door but didn't step outside. "I'm not going." "Yes, you are. We discussed this. Everyone is meeting us there." "Patricia, I never agreed to this tour. You scheduled it without my permission and informed me it was happening. That's not the same thing as me agreeing to participate." Her jaw tightened in the way it had since she was a child when she didn't get her way. "Mom, stop being difficult. Get your purse and let's go." No. We stood there staring at each other across my threshold, and I could see her calculating her next move. Behind her, another car pulled up, Michael's black sedan, with Rebecca in the passenger seat. They had coordinated their arrival, probably planning to present a united front if I proved resistant. Michael approached the door with his lawyer's stride, confident and purposeful. "Mom, what's the problem?" "We're all here. We have an appointment. Let's just go see what they have to offer." "The problem, Michael, is that you've all made plans for my life without consulting me, and now you expect me to go along with those plans, as if I had agreed to them." Rebecca stepped up beside her siblings, completing what felt like an intervention formation. "Mom, we understand this is scary for you. Change is always difficult. But we really think once you see the facility, you'll realize how much better this could be." "Better for whom?" "For you," Patricia said with exaggerated patience. "For your safety, your health, your social connections. And for your peace of mind, knowing you won't have to worry about me anymore." "That too," Michael admitted. "We do worry about you, living here alone." I looked at my 3 children, all dressed nicely for their planned presentation, all wearing expressions of determined concern, and felt a deep sadness settle over me. These were the babies I had nursed, the toddlers I had chased around this very house, the teenagers I had worried about and guided through their difficulties. Now they stood on my porch like adversaries, united in their conviction that they knew better than I did how I should live my life. "I have something to show you," I said finally. "All of you. Come inside." They exchanged glances but followed me into the house. I led them to the dining room, where I had laid out my bank statements, the forged checks, the documentation about Maple Street Holdings, and everything else I had discovered about their financial manipulation. "Sit down." They remained standing, looking uncertain for the first time since they'd arrived. I said sit down. Patricia perched on the edge of a chair, clearly ready to bolt if the conversation became too uncomfortable. Michael and Rebecca sat reluctantly, their eyes already scanning the papers spread across the table. "Yesterday, I went to the bank." I began, my voice calm and steady. "I requested copies of all my financial records for the past 2 years. What I found was very interesting." I picked up the first set of documents. Forged checks, totaling over $15,000, made out to companies that don't exist, signed with versions of my name that I didn't write. Patricia's face had gone very pale. "Mom, there's probably a simple explanation." "There is a simple explanation. Someone has been stealing from me." I picked up the next set of paper. Monthly payments of $450 to something called Maple Street Holdings, a company that was registered 2 years ago with Patricia Greer listed as the registered agent. Michael cleared his throat. "Mom, You might be misunderstanding what those documents show. And because it looks very much like my daughter created a fake company specifically to embezzle money from my bank account. Rebecca spoke up, her social worker training evident in her measured tone. Mom, these are serious accusations. Are you sure you're interpreting this information correctly? I'm sure I can read bank statements and business registration records, Rebecca. I'm also sure that forgery and embezzlement are felonies, regardless of whether the victim is your mother. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths and barely contained panic. I watched my children's faces carefully, seeing guilt, fear, and calculation playing across their features. Finally, Patricia spoke. Mom, even if there were some irregularities in your accounts, that only proves what we've been saying. You're not managing your finances properly. You need help. Help from the people who have been stealing from me. We weren't stealing, Michael said quickly. We were managing expenses related to your care. What expenses? What care? I never authorized any payments to any of these companies. You don't remember authorizing them, Rebecca corrected. That doesn't mean you didn't. I felt my anger rising clean and bright and focused. So now you're claiming I have memory problems again. We're saying that sometimes people in grief make decisions they don't later recall, Patricia said carefully, and sometimes they need family members to help them understand what's happening with their finances. Like creating fake companies to steal their money, like making sure their bills get paid and their needs are met. Michael replied. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where I had lived for 42 years, where I had raised these 3 children, where Harold and I had built a life based on honesty and trust, and mutual respect. Get out of my house, I said without turning around. Mom, Patricia started. Get out of my house and don't come back. You're making a mistake, Michael said, his voice taking on the threatening tone I had heard before. You can't take care of yourself, you can't manage your finances, and you're becoming paranoid and hostile. All of this just proves that you need more help than we initially thought. I turned to face him. Are you threatening me again? I'm stating facts. Facts that any judge would consider relevant in a competency hearing. Then I guess we'll see what a judge thinks about children who forge their mother's signature and embezzle her money while claiming to act in her best interests. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. My children looked at each other with the kind of silent communication that comes from years of shared secrets and coordinated manipulation. Mom, Rebecca said gently, you're upset, and you're not thinking clearly. Why don't we all take a break and talk about this again when everyone's calm? I am calm. I am also done being stolen from, lied to, and manipulated by my own children. You're not being manipulated, Patricia snapped, her patience finally cracking. You're being helped, whether you like it or not. And if you can't see that, then you're proving exactly what we've been saying about your mental state. They left then. Finally, but not before Patricia turned back at the door with one final threat. Mom, we're not giving up on this. We love you too much to let you destroy yourself out of stubbornness. The tour at Sunset Manor is still happening, with or without you. And next week we're filing the paperwork for guardianship proceedings. I watched their cars pull out of my driveway, and felt a strange sense of relief. The pretense was over. The gloves were off. They were no longer pretending this was about my welfare or my choices. They were simply taking what they wanted and daring me to stop them. But what they didn't know was that while they had been planning their careful campaign of manipulation and control, I had been making plans of my own. Margaret Chen's law office was located in a converted Victorian house downtown, painted deep blue with white trim and surrounded by carefully maintained gardens. The building looked more like a residence than a law firm, which I found reassuring. Inside, the reception area was furnished with antique chairs and oriental rugs that suggested both success and discretion. Margaret Chen herself was nothing like what I had expected. She was younger than me, probably in her early 50s, with short black hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a simple black suit and moved with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from winning difficult cases. "Miss Henderson," she said, rising from her desk as I was shown into her office. "Dorothy Kellerman spoke very highly of you when she called. She said you're dealing with some family difficulties." "That's a polite way to put it," I replied, settling into the chair across from her desk. "My children are trying to have me declared incompetent so they can force me into a nursing home and take control of my assets. They've also been embezzling money from my bank account for over a year." Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. "Those are serious allegations. Do you have documentation?" I opened the folder I had brought and began laying out the evidence I had gathered: the forged checks, the bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals, the business registration for Maple Street Holdings, the mortgage documents Michael had claimed were legitimate. Margaret examined each piece of paper carefully, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When she finished, she sat back in her chair and looked at me with what I interpreted as respect. "Mrs. Henderson, you've done excellent work documenting this situation. What you've shown me indicates a clear pattern of financial abuse and fraud. The question is, what do you want to do about it?" "I want to stop them from taking my house and my independence. I want the stolen money returned, and I want to make sure they can never do this to me or anyone else again." "All of those goals are achievable, but the process won't be easy or pleasant. Are you prepared for a protracted legal battle with your own children?" I thought about Patricia's threats, Michael's forged documents, Rebecca's psychological manipulation. I thought about the stranger watching my house, the unauthorized medical appointments, the coordinated campaign to undermine my autonomy. "Mrs. Chen, they declared war on me first. I'm just choosing to fight back." "Good, because in my experience people who commit elder abuse typically escalate their behavior when their victims resist. This is likely to get worse before it gets better." "How much worse?" "They may try to have you involuntarily committed for psychiatric evaluation. They may claim you're a danger to yourself or others. They may attempt to physically remove you from your home." Financial abusers often become desperate when their schemes are exposed. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I also felt something else: determination. "What can we do to protect me?" "Several things. First, we'll file criminal complaints for the forgery and embezzlement. Second, we'll seek restraining orders to prevent them from accessing your property or your financial accounts. Third, we'll petition the court for a protective order regarding any guardianship proceedings they might file." "How long will all of this take?" "It depends on how aggressively they fight back. But Mrs. Henderson, I need you to understand something. Once we start this process, there's no going back. Your relationship with your children will be permanently altered." I looked out the window of her office, at the street where people were going about their normal Saturday activities, shopping and walking dogs and living their uncomplicated lives. I thought about the years ahead, the possibility of spending my remaining time estranged from Patricia, Michael, and Rebecca. Then I thought about Harold, about the life we had built together, about the promises we had made to each other about protecting what we had created. I thought about the home where I was happy, the independence I had fought to maintain, the dignity I refused to surrender. "Mrs. Chen, my children have already altered our relationship permanently. They've chosen to see me as an obstacle to be overcome rather than a person to be respected. I can't change their choices, but I can respond to them. And you want to respond by fighting back. I want to respond by protecting myself and my assets from people who have proven they cannot be trusted, regardless of whether those people happen to be my children." Margaret nodded slowly. "Then let's get started." We spent the next 2 hours going over every detail of my situation, from the first signs of my children's coordination to their most recent threat. Margaret took extensive notes and asked probing questions about timelines, witnesses, and potential evidence I might not have considered. "Mrs. Henderson, I need to ask you some difficult questions, and I need you to answer them honestly. Of course, is there any possibility that you did authorize some of these transactions and simply don't remember? Any chance that grief or stress might have affected your memory of financial decisions?" I had been expecting this question and had given it serious thought. "Miss Chen, I understand why you need to ask that, and I've considered the possibility carefully, but no, there is absolutely no chance that I authorized payments to companies I'd never heard of, or signed documents I don't remember. I may be 68, but my mind is clear and my memory is sharp. Are there any health issues, any medications, anything that might affect your cognitive abilities? I take a low-dose blood pressure medication and a vitamin D supplement. That's it. My last physical was 6 months ago, and my doctor declared me in excellent health for my age. Have you ever been diagnosed with any form of dementia or cognitive decline? Never. And I'd like a current cognitive assessment to document my mental competency before my children can claim otherwise. Margaret smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. That's an excellent idea. I can arrange for an independent psychological evaluation this week. What happens next? Next, we file the criminal complaints and begin the process of freezing your accounts to prevent further theft. We also prepare for their counterattack, because they will almost certainly respond aggressively once they realize you're fighting back with legal representation. How aggressively? In cases like this, families often claim the elderly person is being manipulated by lawyers or outside. They may try to convince authorities that you're not competent to make legal decisions. They may escalate their attempts to gain control of your person and property. So I need to be prepared for them to get worse. Much worse. But Miss Henderson, I want you to know that I've handled many cases like this, and the people who fight back almost always win in the end. Elder abuse thrives in secrecy and isolation. Once it's exposed to legal scrutiny, the abusers usually fold. I left Margaret Chen's office feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not hope that my relationship with my children could be salvaged, but hope that I could protect myself and my independence from their attempts to control my life. Sunday morning brought an unexpected development. I was having coffee on my front porch, enjoying the spring air and the sight of my daffodils blooming along the walk, when a police car pulled up in front of my house. 2 officers got out, a middle-aged man and a younger woman, both looking serious and official. They approached my porch with the careful neutrality of people who weren't sure what kind of situation they were walking into. Mrs. Henderson, I'm Officer Rodriguez, and this is Officer Kim. We received a call expressing concern about your welfare. May we speak with you for a few minutes? My heart sank. What kind of concern? A family member called to report that you've been behaving erratically, making false accusations against your children, and may be suffering from some form of dementia or mental decline. I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. And you're here to determine whether I'm competent? We're here to conduct a welfare check, ma'am, just to make sure you're safe and able to care for yourself. May I ask which family member made this report? Officer Rodriguez consulted his notes. The call came from a Patricia Greer, who identified herself as your daughter. Of course it had. Patricia was escalating exactly as Margaret Chen had predicted, trying to create an official record of my supposed mental decline. Officers, my daughter and I are currently involved in a legal dispute. I believe this welfare check is her attempt to harass me and create documentation that supports her claims about my mental state. The 2 officers exchanged glances. Officer Kim spoke for the first time. Henderson, regardless of the family situation, we still need to complete our assessment. May we come inside and talk with you? I considered refusing, but I realized that would probably be noted as evidence of paranoid or uncooperative behavior. Of course. Would you like some coffee? We sat in my living room, and the officers asked me a series of questions clearly designed to assess my cognitive function and living situation. They wanted to know if I was eating regularly, taking any medications, managing my finances, maintaining my home. They asked about my daily routine, my social connections, any health concerns. I answered every question clearly and thoroughly, offering additional details that demonstrated my mental sharpness and self-sufficiency. I showed them my organized medication list, my household budget, my weekly schedule of activities and responsibilities. Mrs. Henderson, Officer Rodriguez said finally, you seem to be managing very well on your own. However, your daughter expressed specific concerns about financial irregularities and accusations you've been making about family members. Officer, I discovered that someone has been forging checks on my bank account and embezzling money through fraudulent company. I have documentation of these crimes, and I've retained legal counsel to pursue criminal charges. These accusations involve your family members. The evidence points to my children as the perpetrators. Yes, Officer Kim leaned forward slightly. Ma'am, those are very serious allegations. Are you certain about what you're claiming? I got up and retrieved the folder of evidence I had shown to Margaret Chen. Officers, I understand this situation must seem unusual to you, but I assure you, I am not a confused elderly woman making false accusations. I am a crime victim who has discovered that the criminals happen to be my own children. I walked them through the documentation, explaining each piece of evidence and how it fit into the pattern of financial abuse. Both officers took notes and asked intelligent questions that suggested they were taking my claims seriously. When I finished, Officer Rodriguez closed his notebook. Mrs. Henderson, based on our conversation and what you've shown us, you appear to be mentally competent and capable of caring for yourself. However, these financial crimes you've described need to be reported through proper channels. I've already filed complaints with my bank, and my attorney is preparing to file criminal charges. Good, and Mrs. Henderson, if you feel unsafe or threatened by family members, you can contact us immediately. After they left, I called Margaret Chen to report the welfare check. They're moving faster than I expected, she said. How did the officers respond to your evidence? They seemed to take it seriously. But Margaret, I'm worried about what comes next. The next step is probably an attempt to have you involuntarily committed for psychiatric evaluation. We need to move quickly on the restraining orders and criminal complaints. How quickly? I'm filing everything tomorrow morning. And Mrs. Henderson, I want you to carry my business card with you at all times. If anyone attempts to take you anywhere against your will, you call me immediately. That afternoon, I decided to take a proactive step. I called my longtime physician, Dr. Morrison, and scheduled an appointment for the following week. Dr. Morrison, I need a complete cognitive assessment and documentation of my mental competency. Cora, is everything all right? Your daughter Patricia called last week asking about scheduling an appointment for you. She seemed concerned about your memory and decision-making. My blood chilled. Did you schedule anything with her? I told her that you would need to make your own appointments, as you're perfectly capable of managing your own medical care, but I am curious about why you need a cognitive assessment. Because my children are attempting to have me declared mentally incompetent so they can force me into a nursing home against my will. I need medical documentation that proves they're wrong. There was a pause. Cora, that's very concerning. Are you sure about what you're saying? Dr. Morrison, you've been my doctor for 15 years. Do I seem mentally impaired to you? No, you seem as sharp as ever, but these are serious accusations against your family. They're serious crimes my family has committed against me, and I need medical professionals to document my competency before they claim otherwise. Dr. Morrison scheduled me for a comprehensive evaluation later that week, including cognitive testing and a full psychiatric assessment. He also agreed to provide written documentation of my mental competency and ability to make my own medical and legal decisions. Monday morning brought news I had been dreading. Margaret Chen called early with an update on our legal filings. Mrs. Henderson, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that we've filed all the criminal complaints, and the court has approved temporary restraining orders preventing your children from accessing your financial account. And the bad news? They've retained a lawyer. A very aggressive one who specializes in guardianship proceedings. And they've filed a petition claiming you're mentally incompetent and in need of immediate protective custody. I felt the walls closing in around me. What does that mean? It means they're asking the court to grant them emergency guardianship powers, which would allow them to make medical and residential decisions for you while the competency evaluation is pending. Can they do that? They can try. We have a hearing scheduled for Thursday morning. The judge will review their petition and our counter-evidence and decide whether to grant emergency powers or wait for a full competency evaluation. What happens if the judge grants their petition? They would have the legal authority to place you in a care facility immediately, regardless of your wishes. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen, looking around at the home I might be forced to leave within days. The morning sun was streaming through the windows. Harold had replaced 5 years ago, illuminating the small scratches on the table where my grandchildren had done craft projects, casting warm light on the photographs that chronicled my life with the people who were now trying to destroy it. But instead of despair, I felt something else rising in my chest: determination, anger, and a cold, clear resolve that I would not go down without a fight. My children had started this war thinking they were dealing with a weak, confused old woman who would eventually capitulate to their superior planning and resources. They were about to discover just how wrong they were about their mother's capacity for strategic thinking and ruthless determination. If they wanted a battle for my independence, they were going to get one, and I intended to win. Tuesday evening brought an unexpected visitor that changed everything I thought I knew about my situation. I was washing dishes after a solitary dinner when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Through the kitchen window, I could see a woman approaching my front door, someone I didn't recognize but who walked with purpose and determination. The doorbell rang, followed by a voice I'd never heard before. "Mrs. Henderson? My name is Linda Vasquez. I'm a social worker with Adult Protective Services. I need to speak with you about some concerning reports we've received." My heart sank. Adult Protective Services meant my children had escalated beyond family disputes and police welfare checks. They were now involving state agencies in their campaign to prove my incompetence. I opened the door to find a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore a simple blazer and carried a leather portfolio that suggested official business. "Miss Henderson, I apologize for the evening visit, but we received some urgent reports about your welfare that require immediate investigation." "What kind of reports? May I come in? I think we should discuss this privately." I led her to my living room, noting how her eyes took in the cleanliness of my home, the organized bookshelves, the family photos displayed on every surface. Everything about my environment contradicted whatever reports had brought her here. "Mrs. Henderson, we received multiple calls over the past few days, expressing concern about your mental state and ability to care for yourself safely. The reports suggest you're making false accusations against family members, showing signs of paranoia, and maybe suffering from dementia or other cognitive decline." Multiple calls from whom? Linda consulted her notes. Patricia Greer, Michael Henderson, and Rebecca Henderson all contacted our office independently to express their concerns. Of course they had. A coordinated attack designed to create an official record of professional concern about my competency. "Ms. Vasquez, I assume you're required to investigate these reports objectively." "Absolutely. That's why I'm here. Then I need to show you something that might put these reports in a different context." I retrieved my folder of evidence and walked Linda through everything I had discovered about my children's financial fraud. I showed her the forged checks, the fake company registrations, the unauthorized withdrawals, the mortgage documents that had appeared mysteriously in my file. Linda examined each piece of documentation carefully, asking detailed questions about timelines in my discovery process. When I finished, she sat back with a troubled expression. "Mrs. Henderson, if what you're showing me is accurate, these aren't false accusations or signs of paranoia. These are documented crimes. That's what my attorney says as well." "You've retained legal counsel?" "Yes. Margaret Chen, she's filing criminal charges and seeking restraining orders." Linda made notes in her portfolio. "Miss Henderson, I need to ask you some standard questions to assess your cognitive function and living situation." What followed was a comprehensive interview that covered everything from my daily routine, to my medical history, to my understanding of my financial situation. Linda asked me to perform simple tasks like balancing my checkbook, explaining my medication schedule, and describing my plans for managing household maintenance. After an hour, Linda closed her portfolio and looked at me with what appeared to be genuine respect. "Miss Henderson, based on my assessment, you are clearly competent to manage your own affairs. Your home is well maintained, your thinking is clear and organized, and your concerns about financial abuse appear to be legitimate rather than delusional. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Thank you. However, I need to warn you about something. The reports we received weren't just expressing concern about your welfare, they were specifically requesting emergency intervention to remove you from your home for your own protection. Remove me to where? To a secure care facility for psychiatric evaluation and protection from what they described as your deteriorating mental state. The room seemed to tilt around me. They want me involuntarily committed? That appears to be their goal, yes. And Henderson, I need you to understand something important. If they can convince a judge that you're an immediate danger to yourself, they can obtain an emergency order for involuntary commitment before any full competency hearing takes place. Even if I'm clearly competent, the emergency commitment process is designed to act quickly in crisis situations. Sometimes that means people get swept up in the system before there's time for proper evaluation. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What should I do? First, document everything. Keep copies of all your evidence in multiple locations. Second, make sure your attorney is prepared to respond immediately if they attempt emergency commitment. Third, consider having witnesses available who can testify to your competency. What kind of witness? Friends, neighbors, people who interact with you regularly and can attest to your mental sharpness and ability to care for yourself. After Linda left, I sat in my living room feeling overwhelmed by the scope of my children's campaign against me. They weren't just trying to control my finances or force me into a nursing home, they were attempting to have me declared mentally ill and removed from my home against my will. I called Margaret Chen's emergency line. Margaret, they're trying to have me involuntarily committed. I was afraid they might escalate to that level. What happened? I told her about Linda Vasquez's visit and warning about emergency commitment procedures. Cora, we need to act fast. I'm going to file for an emergency injunction tomorrow morning to prevent any involuntary commitment proceeding. But in the meantime, you need to be very careful. Don't answer your door unless you know who it is. Don't sign anything, and if anyone claims to have legal authority to remove you from your home, you call me immediately. Margaret, can they really do this? Can they have me locked up just because they claim I'm mentally ill? Unfortunately, yes. The involuntary commitment laws are designed to protect people who are genuinely unable to care for themselves, but they can be abused by families who want to gain control over elderly relatives. What if they succeed? What if I end up in a psychiatric facility? Then we fight it from there. But Cora, I don't intend to let it get that far. Wednesday morning brought a development I hadn't anticipated. Dorothy Kellerman called early with news that initially seemed positive. Cora, I've been making some discreet inquiries about your children's financial situations, like you asked. What I found might interest you. What did you discover? Patricia's marketing firm has been struggling for the past 2 years. She's behind on her mortgage payments and has significant credit card debt. Michael's law practice is doing better, but he and his wife Jennifer have been living beyond their means and recently took out a large home equity loan. Rebecca is the most stable financially, but she's been sending money to Patricia regularly. So they need money. Desperately, from what I can tell. Patricia's business is probably going to fail within the next 6 months, unless she gets a significant cash infusion. This information cast my children's behavior in an even darker light. They weren't just concerned about my welfare, or trying to help me live more safely. They needed my money to solve their own financial problems, and they were willing to commit crimes to get it. But Dorothy had more news. Cora, there's something else. I did some research on Sunset Manor, the nursing home they wanted to tour with you. What about it? It's not just expensive. It requires a significant upfront payment, almost $50,000, plus monthly fees of over $4,000. But here's the interesting part. If a resident dies or leaves within the first 2 years, the facility keeps the entire upfront payment. I felt sick. So if they got me committed there and I died, they'd inherit your house and other assets, minus whatever the nursing home kept. Dorothy, Are you suggesting they might be planning to? I'm not suggesting anything specific, but I think you need to be very careful about your physical safety, not just your legal situation. That afternoon, I decided to take a proactive step that I hoped would protect me from whatever my children were planning next. I drove to my bank and met with the manager, explaining my situation and requesting additional security measures on my accounts. Mrs. Pearson, given what you've told me about the fraudulent activity, I recommend we freeze all automatic payments and require in-person verification for any withdrawals over $100. Can you also flag my account so that if anyone claims to have power of attorney or guardianship authority, you'll verify it independently? Absolutely. We'll require original court documents and independent verification before allowing anyone else to access your account. I also stopped by the post office and rented a private mailbox under my maiden name, Cora Benton. I wanted to ensure that any legal documents or important communications couldn't be intercepted by my children if they gained access to my home. Wednesday evening brought another unexpected visitor, but this time it was someone I was relieved to see. My neighbor Tom Bradley, a retired police detective who lived 2 houses down, knocked on my door with a concerned expression. Cora, I've been noticing some unusual activity around your house lately. Cars I don't recognize. People watching your place. Is everything all right? I invited Tom in and explained my situation, showing him the same evidence I had shared with Linda Vasquez and Margaret Chen. Tom examined the documents with the trained eye of someone who had spent 30 years investigating financial crimes. Cora, this is textbook elder abuse. I've seen cases like this before, and they can get dangerous when the abusers feel cornered. Dangerous how? Sometimes families escalate to physical intimidation or even violence when their financial schemes are exposed. Have your children shown any signs of aggressive behavior? I thought about Michael's threats regarding guardianship proceedings, Patricia's increasingly controlling demands, Rebecca's manipulative psychological tactics, not physical violence, but definitely psychological intimidation. I want you to have my phone number, and I want you to call me if you see anything suspicious or feel unsafe. I may be retired, but I still have contacts in the department who can respond quickly if needed. Tom also offered to keep an eye on my house and watch for any unusual activity. Cora, you're not alone in this. There are people in this neighborhood who care about you and won't let your family harm you. Thursday morning dawned gray and rainy, matching my mood as I prepared for what might be the most important day of my life. The court hearing that would determine whether my children could obtain emergency guardianship powers was scheduled for 10 o'clock. Margaret Chen picked me up at 9, and we rode to the courthouse in relative silence. I was dressed in my most conservative outfit, a navy blue suit that Harold had always said made me look distinguished, and I carried a folder with copies of all my evidence. Cora, remember what we discussed. Let me do most of the talking, but if the judge asks you direct questions, answer clearly and calmly. Don't let their attorney provoke you into seeming emotional or unstable. The courthouse was an imposing brick building with marble floors and high ceilings that made every sound echo. We found the correct courtroom and took seats at a table facing the judge's bench. Across the aisle, my 3 children sat with their attorney, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked like he specialized in aggressive litigation. I hadn't seen Patricia, Michael, or Rebecca since our confrontation in my dining room, and the sight of them sitting together in unified opposition to me was more painful than I had expected. These were my babies, the children I had loved and sacrificed for, and they were now trying to have me declared legally incompetent. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and intelligent eyes, entered promptly at 10 o'clock. The bailiff called our case, and the proceedings began. My children's attorney, who introduced himself as James Morrison, spoke first. He painted a picture of a confused, declining elderly woman who was making false accusations against loving children who only wanted to protect her. Your Honor, Miss Henderson has been exhibiting clear signs of dementia and paranoid delusions. She's accused her own children of embezzling money through imaginary companies. She's become hostile and suspicious of family members who are trying to help her. She's refusing medical care and living in dangerous isolation. He presented reports from Adult Protective Services, citing the welfare check and the concerns expressed by my children. He described my resistance to their suggestions about assisted living as evidence of impaired judgment. Your Honor, the Henderson children are not asking for permanent guardianship. They're requesting emergency protective custody to ensure their mother's safety, while a full competency evaluation can be completed. When Margaret Chen rose to respond, her voice was calm but forceful. Your Honor, what we have here is not a confused elderly woman making false accusations. What we have is a clear case of financial elder abuse perpetrated by adult children who are attempting to use the legal system to cover their crime. She presented our evidence methodically: the forged checks, the fake company registrations, the unauthorized withdrawals, the fraudulent mortgage documents. She explained how each piece fit into a pattern of systematic financial abuse. Your Honor, Ms. Henderson is not suffering from dementia or delusions. She is a crime victim who has discovered that the criminals happen to be her own children. She has retained legal counsel, filed criminal complaints, and taken appropriate steps to protect herself from further abuse. Margaret also presented the cognitive assessment I had completed with Dr. Morrison, which clearly demonstrated my mental competency and ability to make my own decisions. The judge listened carefully to both presentations, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When the attorneys finished, she addressed me directly. Mrs. Henderson, I'd like to hear from you personally. Can you explain to me what you believe has been happening with your finances? I stood and looked directly at the judge, drawing on every ounce of confidence and clarity I possess. Your Honor, my children have been systematically stealing money from my bank account for over a year. They forged my signature on checks, created fake companies to embezzle funds, and produced fraudulent mortgage documents to make it appear that I'm financially unstable. When I discovered their crimes, and refused to go along with their plan to move me to a nursing home, they escalated to threats of guardianship proceedings and involuntary commitment. And you believe these actions are motivated by their own financial problems and their desire to gain control of my assets. They need money, and they've decided that the easiest way to get it is to declare me incompetent and take control of my property. The judge made notes as I spoke, and when I finished, she addressed my children's attorney. Mr. Morrison, the evidence presented suggests that your clients may have committed serious financial crimes against Mrs. Henderson. How do you explain the forged checks and unauthorized withdrawal? Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, elderly people sometimes become confused about their financial transactions. Mrs. Henderson may have authorized these payments and simply forgotten about them. What about the company registrations showing Ms. Greer as the agent for businesses that supposedly provided services to Mrs. Henderson? Your Honor, we would need to investigate those claims more thoroughly before commenting. The judge's expression suggested she was not impressed by Morrison's evasive answer. She announced a brief recess to review the evidence more carefully. During the break, I watched my children huddled with their attorney in urgent conversation. Patricia looked pale and frightened. Michael's jaw was set in a stubborn line. Rebecca kept glancing at me with what might have been regret. When court resumed, the judge had reached her decision. Based on the evidence presented, I find no justification for emergency guardianship proceedings. Mrs. Henderson appears to be mentally competent and capable of managing her own affairs. Furthermore, the allegations of financial abuse are serious and require thorough investigation by appropriate law enforcement agencies. She denied my children's petition for emergency guardianship and ordered that any future proceedings would require a full competency evaluation by court-appointed professionals. Mrs. Henderson, you are free to return to your home and continue managing your own affairs. Ms. Morrison, I strongly advise your clients to cease any attempts to control or intimidate Mrs. Henderson while these financial matters are under investigation. As we left the courthouse, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. I had won this battle, but the war was far from over. My children would not give up easily, and I knew they would find other ways to pressure me. Margaret Chen walked me to the parking lot, her expression cautiously optimistic. Cora, this was a significant victory, but we need to stay vigilant. People who commit elder abuse often escalate their behavior when legal methods fail. What should I expect next? They might try direct intimidation, or they might attempt to manipulate other family members or friends to pressure you. They could also try to claim that I'm taking advantage of you or that someone else is influencing your decisions. That evening, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, processing the events of the day. I had successfully defended my independence in court, but at the cost of permanently severing my relationship with my children. They were no longer just difficult or misguided, they were criminals who had tried to steal my money and my freedom. The phone rang around 8 o'clock. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mom?" It was Rebecca, her voice small and uncertain. "Mom, can we talk?" "I don't think we have anything to discuss, Rebecca. Please, I need to tell you something important. Something about Patricia and Michael that you don't know." I hesitated. This could be another manipulation. Another attempt to draw me into their web of lies and control. What could you possibly tell me that would change anything? "Mom, I never wanted this to go so far. I thought we were just helping you plan for the future. I didn't know about the money, about the forged checks, about any of it, until this week. Rebecca, you participated in calling Adult Protective Services. You tried to have me committed. I know, and I'm ashamed of that. But Mom, Patricia threatened to cut me off from the family if I didn't support their plan. She said you were really sick, and that we had to save you from yourself." I felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. "Are you saying you didn't know about the financial fraud?" "I swear I didn't know. And Mom, there's something else. Something that proves Patricia and Michael have been planning this for a long time." "What? Mom, can I come over? I have something to show you that changes everything." Against my better judgment, I agreed to let Rebecca visit. 30 minutes later, she arrived at my door carrying a laptop and looking like she hadn't slept in days. "Mom, I need to show you something I found on Patricia's computer." She opened the laptop and pulled up a series of emails dating back over 2 years. The emails were between Patricia and Michael, discussing their mother problem and strategies for gaining control of my asset. One email from Patricia to Michael, dated 18 months ago, laid out their entire plan in chilling detail. "We need to create a financial crisis that makes it impossible for her to stay in the house. Once we establish that she can't manage her money, we can justify everything else." Another email from Michael outlined his strategy for producing fraudulent mortgage documents. "I have a contact who can create convincing paperwork showing outstanding lines. Mom will never think to verify it independently." A more recent email from Patricia discussed their backup plan if I proved resistant. "If she won't go willingly, we'll have to pursue involuntary commitment. Rebecca's social work credentials will be useful for documenting mental decline." I stared at the screen, reading evidence of a conspiracy that had been in motion for years. My children hadn't just decided recently that I needed help. They had been systematically planning to steal my money and destroy my independence since shortly after Harold's death. "Rebecca, why are you showing me this?" "Because I finally understand what they've been doing, and I can't be part of it anymore." "Mom, they used me. They convinced me you were sick and needed help, but really they just wanted your money to solve their own problem. And you believe me now about the financial fraud." "I believe you, and I want to help you stop them." Rebecca's defection from her siblings' conspiracy was a development I hadn't anticipated. Having one of my own children as an ally in this battle changed the dynamic significantly. "Rebecca, if you're serious about helping me, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about money anymore." They tried to have me declared mentally incompetent and forcibly removed from my home. That's not something I can forgive or forget. I know. "And Mom, I think you should also know that they're not done. I heard Patricia on the phone yesterday, talking about other options, if the guardianship proceeding failed." "What kind of other option?" "I don't know specifically, but she mentioned something about making sure you weren't able to live alone anymore, one way or another." A chill ran down my spine. "Rebecca, are you saying they might try to hurt me physically?" "I don't know. But Mom, I think you need to be very careful. When people get desperate, sometimes they do things they never thought they'd be capable of." That night, I lay awake thinking about Rebecca's warning and wondering what my other 2 children might be planning. The court victory had saved my immediate independence, but it had also made Patricia and Michael more desperate and potentially more dangerous. I thought about Harold. about what he would have done in this situation. Harold had always been a man who believed in justice and protection of the innocent. He would have fought to protect me just as I was fighting to protect myself. But Harold also would have been heartbroken to see our family destroyed by greed and betrayal. He had loved our children as much as I did, and he would have grieved for the people they had become. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I made a resolution. I would continue to protect myself and my independence, but I would also find a way to ensure that my children faced consequences for their crimes, not out of vengeance, but out of justice. They had declared war on me, thinking I was too weak and confused to fight back effectively. Tomorrow, I would begin showing them exactly how wrong they were about their mother's capacity for strategic thinking and determination. The revelation phase of this battle was complete. Now it was time for the empowerment phase to begin. Friday morning arrived with crystalline clarity, both in the weather and in my mind. The fog of confusion and hurt that had clouded my judgment for months had finally lifted, replaced by a cold, calculating determination that would have impressed Harold. I had evidence, allies, and most importantly, I had a plan that would end this war on my terms. Rebecca arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, as we had arranged. She looked nervous but resolute, carrying a flash drive and a manila envelope thick with printed email. "Mom, I've been thinking about this all night. There's more evidence than just the emails I showed you yesterday." She handed me the envelope. Patricia kept detailed records of every financial projections, timeline spreadsheets, even notes about which nursing homes offered the best return on upfront investments. I opened the envelope and found myself staring at documents that revealed the breathtaking scope of their conspiracy. Patricia had created a business plan for my destruction, complete with cost-benefit analyses and contingency strategies. One document, titled Asset Recovery Timeline, laid out their projected profits from selling my house, liquidating my investments, and collecting insurance policies. Another spreadsheet calculated the minimum time I would need to remain in institutional care before they could access my full estate. Most chilling was a handwritten note in Patricia's distinctive script. Emergency commitment option. Dr. Hendricks owes Michael favor from malpractice case. Could provide psychiatric evaluation supporting incompetency claim. Rebecca, this shows they've been planning to bribe a doctor to declare me mentally ill. I know, Mom, when I realized how deep this went, I couldn't be part of it anymore, but I need you to know something else. They're meeting this morning at Patricia's house to plan their next move. I looked at my youngest daughter, seeing for the first time in months the child I had raised rather than the adult who had betrayed me. "What are you proposing we do with this information?" "I think we should give them exactly what they think they want." Her suggestion was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of waiting for Patricia and Michael to make their next move, we would control the narrative by appearing to surrender while actually setting a trap that would expose their crimes beyond any doubt. At 10 o'clock I called Patricia's cell phone. "Patricia, I need to talk to you and Mike. I've been thinking about everything that's happened, and I believe I may have been wrong about some things." There was a pause. Clearly suspicion warring with hope in Patricia's mind. "What do you mean, Mom?" "I mean, maybe I have been confused about the financial matter. Maybe I did authorize those payments and forgot about them. I'm worried that I might not be thinking as clearly as I thought I was." "Mom, are you saying you want to reconsider the nursing home?" "I'm saying I want to sit down with all of you and figure out what's best for everyone. Can you come over this afternoon?" Around 2 o'clock, I could hear the excitement in Patricia's voice as she agreed. She probably thought her psychological warfare had finally broken my resistance. What she didn't know was that Margaret Chen would be positioned in my basement with recording equipment, and that Tom Bradley would be watching from his house across the street. Rebecca would be present as my supposed advocate, but she would actually be steering the conversation toward topics that would reveal Patricia and Michael's criminal intentions. The afternoon setup proceeded flawlessly. Margaret Chen arrived first, carrying equipment that looked like standard legal files but actually contained sophisticated recording devices. She positioned herself in my basement office, where she could hear everything happening in the living room above, through the old house's thin floor. Tom Bradley took his position at his front window with a telephoto lens, ready to document anyone entering or leaving my property. We had also arranged for Dorothy Kellerman to call my house phone at predetermined intervals, providing opportunities for Patricia and Michael to reveal their true plans, while they thought I was distracted. At exactly 2 o'clock, Patricia's SUV pulled into my driveway, followed by Michael's sedan. They entered my house with the confident swagger of people who believed they had finally broken their opposition. "Mom, you look tired," Patricia said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Are you sure you're feeling all right? I've been having trouble sleeping lately," and some confusion about dates and appointments. I watched Patricia and Michael exchange meaningful glances. They thought they were witnessing my mental decline, when actually they were walking into carefully laid traps. "Mom," Michael said, settling into Harold's old chair like he already owned it, "we want you to know that we're not angry about the misunderstandings over the financial matters. Sometimes grief affects people's memory and judgment. I've been wondering if maybe I did sign some documents I don't remember. Everything has been so overwhelming since your father died." "Of course you did," Patricia said soothingly. "The important thing is getting you the help you need now." Rebecca played her role perfectly, acting as my concerned advocate while actually guiding the conversation toward incriminating territory. "Patricia, Mom is worried about the costs of assisted living. Can you explain again how the financial arrangements would work?" Patricia launched into a detailed explanation that revealed far more than she intended. She described how the sale of my house would provide more than enough money for my care, with substantial funds remaining for family needs. She explained how my investments could be properly managed by Michael to ensure maximum returns for everyone. Most damaging, she outlined their timeline for moving me out of the house. "We really need to complete this transition within the next month, before the end of the fiscal year." "Why is the timing so important?" I asked innocently. Michael answered without thinking. "Well, there are some business opportunities that require immediate capital investment." "What kind of business opportunity?" Patricia shot Michael a warning look, but he was already committed to his explanation. "My law practice is expanding, and Patricia's marketing firm has some significant contracts pending. We just need some temporary financing to bridge the gap." "So you need money from selling my house to invest in your businesses?" "Mom, it's not like that," Patricia said quickly. "It's just that the timing works out well for everyone." The phone rang at our prearranged signal. While I answered Dorothy's call, I heard Patricia whisper urgently to Michael, "Stop talking about the money, just focus on her mental state." When I returned to the living room, Michael had shifted tactics. "Mom, we're concerned that you're not safe living alone anymore. Yesterday you called Rebecca 3 times asking what day it was." This was a complete fabrication, as Rebecca and I both knew, but it was exactly the kind of lie Margaret Chen needed to hear to understand their strategy. "Did I really call 3 times? I don't remember that." "See, that's exactly what we're worried about," Patricia said. "These memory lapses are getting worse." Rebecca seized the opportunity to push them further. "What happens if Mom refuses to go to assisted living? What options do we have then?" Patricia and Michael exchanged another glance, clearly debating how much to reveal. "Well," Michael said carefully, "there are legal procedures available when elderly people aren't capable of making safe decisions for themselves." "You mean like guardianship or involuntary commitment for psychiatric evaluation?" Patricia added. "Dr. Hendricks has already indicated he'd be willing to provide a professional assessment of Mom's mental state." There it was, the explicit admission of their plan to bribe a doctor for a fraudulent psychiatric evaluation. "Would that be expensive?" I asked. "Mom, don't worry about the cost," Michael said. "Once we establish that you need professional care, insurance will cover most of the expenses. And the house? The house would need to be sold to pay for your long-term care," Patricia explained. "But don't worry about any of that. We'll handle all the financial details." I excused myself to use the bathroom, actually going to the basement to check with Margaret Chen. She gave me a thumbs up, indicating that she had recorded everything we need. When I returned upstairs, I found Patricia and Michael examining my financial documents, which I had deliberately left on the dining room table. "Mom, it looks like you haven't been paying some of your bills," Patricia said, holding up a notice I had prepared for this exact purpose. "I've been confused about which bills I've paid, and which ones I haven't. This is exactly what we've been worried about, Michael said. You can't continue to manage your finances independently. Maybe you're right. Maybe I do need help. The relief on their faces was palpable. They thought they had finally convinced me to surrender. Mom, we could arrange for you to visit Sunset Manor this weekend, Patricia suggested, just to see the facilities. Nothing permanent. Would you be able to handle selling the house while I'm getting settled? Of course, Michael said. We already have a realtor who can list it immediately. And you'd manage my investments? Absolutely. We'd make sure everything is handled properly. I looked around my living room, at the home where I had raised these children, where Harold and I had built our life together. Then I looked at Patricia and Michael sitting in my furniture, planning to steal my life's work, confident that their confused old mother was finally surrendering to their superior wisdom. I have something to tell you both, I said quietly. They leaned forward expectantly. I haven't been confused about anything. I haven't been having memory problems, and I haven't been paying those bills, because I canceled them after discovering they were fraudulent charges created by your fake companies. The color drained from both their faces. Mom, what are you talking about? Patricia stammered. I'm talking about Maple Street Holdings, the company you created to embezzle money from my bank account. I'm talking about the forged checks Michael helped you create. I'm talking about your plan to bribe Dr. Hendricks for a fake psychiatric evaluation. I stood up and walked to the front window, where I could see Tom Bradley documenting everything from across the street. I'm also talking about the recording equipment that's been documenting this entire conversation, and the attorney who's been listening from my basement. Margaret Chen emerged from the basement on cue, carrying her recording equipment, and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who had just gathered irrefutable evidence of multiple felonies. Patricia Greer and Michael Henderson, she said formally, you have just confessed to conspiracy, elder abuse, embezzlement, fraud, and attempted bribery of a medical professional. Everything you've said has been recorded and will be submitted as evidence in the criminal proceedings against you. Patricia jumped to her feet, her face flushed with rage and panic. You can't do this. You can't record private family conversations. Actually, I can, I replied calmly. This is my house, and I have every right to record conversations in my own living room, especially when those conversations involve planning crimes against me. Michael had gone very pale and quiet, his lawyer's training telling him exactly how much trouble they were in. Mom, please, he said finally, we're family. Surely we can work this out without involving the courts. Family members don't steal from each other, Michael. Family members don't forge each other's signatures. Family members don't try to have each other declared mentally ill for financial gain. Rebecca, who had been silent during the revelation, finally spoke up. Patricia, Michael, I gave Mom copies of all the emails, all the planning documents, everything. She knows about the timeline, the asset recovery projections, the nursing home investment analysis. She knows everything. Patricia turned on Rebecca with fury. You betrayed your own family. No, Rebecca replied steadily. I stopped participating in betraying my mother. Margaret Chen began packing up her equipment. Mrs. Henderson, I have everything I need to file comprehensive criminal charges. Conspiracy, elder abuse, embezzlement, fraud, attempted bribery and possibly extortion. We're looking at potential sentences of 10 to 15 years. You're all insane, Patricia said desperately. Mom, you can't seriously be planning to send your own children to prison. I looked at her for a long moment, remembering the baby I had rocked to sleep, the little girl who had helped me bake cookies, the young woman who had called me crying when her first business failed. Patricia, you're not my children anymore. Children don't steal from their parents. Children don't forge documents and create fake companies. Children don't try to have their mothers committed to psychiatric facilities against their will. We were trying to help you. You were trying to help yourselves to my money. I walked to the front door and opened. Get out of my house, both of you. Mom, please. Michael tried one last time. Think about what this will do to the family. The family was destroyed the day you decided to steal from me, rather than simply asking for help with your financial problem. They left then, Patricia slamming the door behind her, and Michael looking like a man walking to his own execution. Through the window I watched them stand in my driveway arguing, probably trying to decide whether to flee or fight. Margaret Chen smiled grimly as she watched them leave. Cora, that was some of the best evidence gathering I've ever witnessed. With those recordings and Rebecca's documents, we have an airtight case. What happens next? Next, I file criminal charges first thing Monday morning. The district attorney will probably want to interview you and Rebecca this week. Given the strength of our evidence, I expect Patricia and Michael will be arrested within days. That evening, after Margaret and Rebecca had left, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and Harold's photo, processing what had happened. Well, Harold, I said to his smiling face, I think we protected what we built together. The house felt different now, lighter somehow. The oppressive weight of manipulation and deceit had been lifted. I was no longer a victim waiting for the next attack. I was a woman who had fought back and won. The phone rang around 9 o'clock. It was Dorothy Kellerman. Cora, Tom Bradley called me with an update. Patricia and Michael both tried to access their bank accounts this evening, probably planning to flee before charges are filed. Were they successful? No. Apparently Margaret Chen had already contacted the authorities, and their accounts have been frozen pending investigation. So they can't run, and they can't hide. Cora, you've won. You've protected yourself and ensured they'll face consequences for what they did. Monday morning brought the news I had been waiting for. Margaret Chen called at 8:30 with an update. Cora, Patricia and Michael were both arrested this morning. Patricia was charged with embezzlement, conspiracy and elder abuse. Michael was charged with fraud, conspiracy and attempted obstruction of justice. What about Rebecca? Rebecca is being treated as a cooperating witness. Her willingness to provide evidence and testimony will probably keep her from facing criminal charges. And my money? The court has issued orders freezing all their assets and requiring restitution of everything they stole from you, plus damages and penalties. You'll recover every penny, with interest. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Hendricks, the physician Michael and Patricia had planned to bribe for a fraudulent psychiatric evaluation, appeared at my door looking deeply uncomfortable. Mrs. Henderson, I owe you an apology and an explanation. I invited him in, curious about what he had to say. Your son Michael approached me several weeks ago about providing a psychiatric evaluation that would support claims about your mental decline. He suggested that my professional opinion would carry weight in guardianship proceedings. And you agreed? I'm ashamed to say I considered it. Michael represented it as a way to help a family member who was refusing necessary care. But when I learned about the criminal charges and the actual evidence of your mental competency, I realized I had almost become an accessory to elder abuse. Dr. Hendricks had come to offer his testimony about Michael's attempted bribery, which would strengthen the criminal case against my children. Mrs. Henderson, I want you to know that I've reported Michael's attempt to suborn false testimony to the medical board and the Bar Association. He'll face professional sanctions in addition to criminal charges. 2 weeks later, I stood in my garden planting new rose bushes, something I had been planning to do since spring began. The physical work felt good, and the symbolism wasn't lost on me. I was literally planting new growth in the place where my children had tried to destroy my life. Rebecca visited that afternoon, bringing her grandmother's quilt that she wanted to return to me. Mom, I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I need you to know how sorry I am for my part in it. Rebecca, you helped me expose their crimes. Without your evidence, they might have succeeded, but I participated in the beginning. I made those calls to Adult Protective Service. I supported their claims about your mental state. I set down my gardening tools and looked at my youngest daughter. Rebecca, people make mistakes. What matters is what they do when they realize they're wrong. Are you saying you forgive me? I'm saying I understand that Patricia and Michael manipulated you just like they tried to manipulate me. The difference is that you had the integrity to stop when you realized what was really happening. We sat together on Harold's bench, looking at the garden where new growth was already emerging from the soil I had prepared. What happens now? Rebecca asked. Now I continue living my life the way I choose to live it. I keep teaching piano lessons. I keep volunteering at the literacy center, and I keep maintaining this house that your father and I built together, and Patricia and Michael will face the consequences of their choices. That's not my responsibility anymore. 3 months later, I received a letter from Patricia while she was awaiting trial. She had been unable to make bail and was being held in county jail. The letter was full of apologies, explanations, and pleas for forgiveness. She claimed she had never intended for things to go so far, that she had only wanted to help me, that she had been driven by financial desperation rather than greed. I read the letter carefully, then folded it and placed it in a box with other documents related to the case. I didn't respond. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. Michael's trial concluded first. He was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 8 years in prison, with his law license permanently revoked. Patricia's trial followed 2 weeks later, resulting in a conviction and a 7-year sentence. The local newspaper covered both trials extensively, describing them as cautionary tales about elder abuse and family financial crimes. I was portrayed as a victim who had fought back successfully, which was accurate as far as it went, but I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a survivor, a woman who had protected what mattered to her and ensured that criminals faced justice, even when those criminals were her own children. 6 months after the trials, Rebecca brought her new boyfriend to meet me. He was a kind man, who worked as a teacher, and treated Rebecca with the respect and affection she deserved. "Mom, we've been talking about getting married," Rebecca said over Sunday dinner, "and we'd like your blessing." I looked at my youngest daughter, seeing the happiness in her eyes and the contentment in her posture. She had found her way back to the values Harold and I had tried to instill in our children. "You have my blessing, and my love," I told her. "Your father would be proud of the woman you've become." That evening, after Rebecca and her boyfriend had left, I sat in my living room with a book and a cup of tea, listening to the familiar sounds of my house settling around me. Outside, the garden was in full summer bloom, and the evening light streaming through my windows illuminated the photographs of a lifetime of memories. I had protected my home, my independence, and my dignity. I had ensured that criminals faced justice, and that future elderly victims might be safer because of the precedent set by my case. Most importantly, I had proven to myself that age does not mean weakness, that widowhood does not mean helplessness, and that family bonds do not excuse criminal behavior. My children had tried to write the ending of my story for me, casting me as a confused old woman who needed their guidance and protection. Instead, I had written my own ending, that of a strong woman who refused to be victimized, and who fought back with intelligence, determination, and the kind of strategic thinking that comes from 68 years of facing life's challenges. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to the bedroom I had shared with Harold, I smiled thinking about what he would have said about this entire ordeal. "Cora," I could almost hear his voice saying, "you showed them exactly who they were dealing with." Yes, I thought, climbing the stairs of the house I had successfully defended. Yes, I certainly did. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.